Honestly, I hate filming in the morning. Still waking up a little bit, but bear with me. Busted out my Terrifier 2 hoodie for this special occasion. Terrifier 3 was one of my most anticipated horror movies for 2024. So going into this one, I had some pretty high hopes. I've been a Terrifier fan since the beginning, and I mean, after the wild ride that was Terrifier 2, I mean, how could you not be excited for what comes next? But walking out of the theater, I couldn't help but feel like something was a little off. Like maybe a chunk of the movie was missing. Before we get into that, let's start with the good, and there's lots of it. First and foremost, the kills are exactly what you're looking for this time around. Brutal, shocking, and delivered with that signature gleeful violence that Art the Clown has become known for. They don't hold back, and if you're squeamish, this is not the movie for you. Well, really, none of the movies are for you, but this one specifically, no. You probably already heard about the shower scene. Let me just say, it is worse than you think, but in the best way possible for some of you. It really went there, and then some. People are going to be talking about that one for a long time. It's the scene that rivals the like upside down split in half scene from the first movie and the bedroom scene from the second movie. This is that movie sequence. People are going to be talking about the shower scene. Now, as for Art himself, David Howard Thornton once again knocks it out of the park. At this point, he is Art the Clown. No one else could do it like he does. Think Robert Englund to Freddy Krueger as David Howard Thornton is to Art the Clown. He has completely embodied that character to perfection. His performance here is somehow even more menacing than before, and yet he still keeps that twisted, almost slapstick humor that makes Art so unsettling. One minute you're laughing at how ridiculous he is, and then the next minute you're horrified by what he's capable of. It's that balance that makes Art such a great horror villain. He's unpredictable, and that's just part of what keeps you on edge. Now, one of the biggest surprises this time around was Vicky's return as his sidekick. Now, when I first heard about that, I wasn't sure how it would work, but honestly, it's a cool addition. It gives Art a different dynamic to play off of without totally taking the spotlight away from him. And Vicky's transformation from victim to accomplice feels natural in the twisted world of Terrifier, and I like the way they've handled it since the first movie. Moving on to Sienna though, let me tell you, she is the real MVP of this movie. Lauren Levera's back, and she's even more badass this time around. Now, what I love about Sienna is that she's not your typical final girl. She's got depth. She's not just running around screaming and tripping over things. She's actually dealing with some heavy PTSD from the events of the last movie. It's actually handled really well. These hallucinations of her dead friends, like with Brooke and stuff, I feel like that was such a great touch. It adds a layer of psychological horror to the movie that I wasn't expecting, but really appreciated. It's unfortunately only used really in that one or maybe two scenes, and then it's kind of dropped for the rest of the movie, but I like that it was included nonetheless. It's rare to see that kind of character depth in slasher films, and I think that's part of why Sienna stands out so much. She's not just fighting Art, which she does very well. She's also fighting her own trauma, and that makes her journey so much more compelling compared to other final girls that we've seen in movies like this in the past. However though, as the movie goes on, there are some cracks that start to show just a little bit. Jonathan, for example, I mean, what happened? After being such a pivotal character in Terrifier 2, he's barely in this one and somehow was able to go from middle school to college within 5 years. Like, how the fuck? Never mind. Anyways, in exchange, they really pushed Gabby to the forefront, and while she's fine as a character, it felt forced. It's like they sidelined Jonathan to make room for her, and it just didn't really sit right with me. He was already established, and his story felt unfinished, especially with how the movie ends. If you know, you know. They could have easily given him more to do without shoehorning in Gabby's arc, which again wasn't bad, but it just felt so forced. I get that they wanted to expand the world, but it came at the expense of characters we were already invested in. Now, let's talk about the opening scene. It's brutal. No barfing, no feigning, no people running out of the theater for us. But this one's pretty rough to get through, I'm not gonna lie. They waste no time getting right into the carnage, but it walks that fine line between pushing boundaries and being too much. There's no spoilers for this review, but I mean, what people assume was gonna be like super rough and hard to watch in this movie was kids dying. I mean, obviously, like from the marketing and shit, like it was obvious that that was the general worry. I don't think that's really spoiling anything here with what I'm saying. The way that it was portrayed in the movie, for me, it mostly worked because it's shocking. I mean, this doesn't usually happen in most horror movies. Usually they're safe, but it's shocking without being distasteful, if you get what I mean. Mostly. I could see how it might be too much for some viewers, but again, if you're going into Terrifier 3, I mean, you know what you're signing up for at this point. But the way that the violence towards kids in this movie, yes, it's shocking, it's terrible, and not something I generally want to see. But the way that it was handled, I think, was done in the best way possible that you could do for this movie. Still pushing that boundary, but not going too far in a way that you're gonna alienate a good chunk of your audience. And if it had been done any other way or shown just even a little bit more, I could definitely see it turning off at least some portion of audiences. Now getting back to the cracks that started showing as the movie went on, one of my biggest gripes with Terrifier 2 was that it felt just a little too long. There were just a few things that just felt a little bit too long. Here, with Terrifier 3, this movie actually could have benefited from extra time to flesh things out compared to the second Terrifier. It's rare that I say that about a horror movie, especially one like this, but there were moments that felt rushed or just completely omitted. Like they were just trying to cram too much in too little time. If they had given certain scenes or storylines more breathing room, it could have felt more cohesive and maybe not had certain important things take place off screen. Definitely could have used maybe an extra 10 minutes for some of that, but it's kind of left up in the air by the end of the movie, so maybe it was done for a reason. Stranger things have happened in the Terrifier universe, especially given how the movie ended, so I'm not gonna fault the movie too much for that. Either way though, just in general, I feel like this movie could have used the extra 10 or 15 minutes that Terrifier 2 had, because this one definitely feels like it needed just a little bit more breathing room. Following that, tone-wise, Terrifier 3 I would say is definitely as dark as the first Terrifier, but it's missing the twisted fun of the second movie. There's a griminess to it that just wasn't present in the second movie, but was present in the first movie, if that makes sense. And while I appreciate that they didn't try to just rehash the vibes and everything that went into Terrifier 2, I really did miss some of the over-the-top insanity that made that film so entertaining. It's still violent and gory, but it's just not as playful. I would say think of the second movie as a bloody roller coaster ride, and this one is more of a slow descent into madness. Both approaches work, but I personally miss the fun factor just a little bit more. All in all though, I would say that Terrifier 3 is a mixed bag with more positives than negatives. The highs are really high. The kills, the score, Art and Sienna's performances, and the cinematography too. Look, throughout all of the Terrifier films, no matter how you feel about them, they're all at the very least made with merit. Damien Leone really cares about how his films look. Every single Terrifier movie has had such great presentation and such care and merit put into it. However, the lows are noticeable. There's just something missing here that keeps it from being as great as it could have been. Still, if you're a fan of the series, you're gonna find a lot to enjoy. I did. It's worth watching for the incredible practical effects, the performances, the cinematography, the score. All of it is really worth checking out. Art the Clown is as terrifying as ever, and while the movie doesn't quite reach the height of its predecessor, for me at least, I would say it's still a solid entry in what's becoming one of horror's most memorable franchises. Alright guys, well that about wraps up my Terrifier 3 spoiler-free review. I intentionally avoided adding any spoilers into this video because I think the best experience is always going in as blind as you can. However, I will still be talking about the spoilers whenever I get into my Terrifier trilogy ranking video, which I plan on releasing sometime later this month or maybe early November. Just depends on my schedule. Keep your eye out for that. If you're new here and you liked what you saw, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel out a lot. And if you really liked what you saw, hit the notifications bell so you'll be notified whenever I post new videos. As always, thank you guys so much for your support. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.